welcome you. This is the Highlight Podcast, and today we have a special guest, our established and credentialed Mayor Girtz, Kelly Girtz. He's been the mayor of Athens for how long now? It's about
a little over 6 years.
Yeah.
Elected in 2018. And of course, Athens, along with the other unified governments in the state, has this crazy electoral calendar where you're elected in May and you don't take office till the following January.
Right.
So Macon and Columbus and Augusta are in the same boat we're in. So it feels like longer than 6 years.
Yeah.
Because it was almost 7 years ago that I was elected.
Right. So I want to just, the reason why I brought you on today was, you guys are in the budget planning process.
We are indeed.
And there are a lot
this time.
Yeah, so it gets really crazy. And I really just wanted to bring you on and allow you to kind of share. You just gave your state of the city address and Rotary Club, and just want to really give another platform to that message and kind of hear what the priorities are going into 2026 and how you plan to address it. So floor is yours. Thanks for coming by.
Sure. Well, just to kind of give a really high level overview, and to break things down for your listeners, local governments, especially unified local governments where city and county have merged, spend money from a bunch of different buckets. The biggest one of those buckets is called the general fund. And so that's where people's property taxes go. That's where 1 penny of your sales tax goes. That's where the kind of fees that places like Georgia Power and Charter Cable and AT&T pay to use the public right-of-way go. And so that's a little bit more in this coming year, starting this summer. It's a little bit more than $200 million altogether. And then on top of that, there's a little bit more than $150 million additional dollars that are what we call enterprise funds or specialty funds. And so those are things like your water and sewer fees and your SPLOST pennies and the money that goes into the solid waste account and the public transit account. So altogether, we spend about $360 million every year. But just kind of diving into the general fund, the biggest department is the police department with about 325 employees when we're at full tilt. And thankfully, just owing to, I think, probably fair compensation and benefits and really quality leadership and a lot of outreach and good training and retention, we're completely full in the police department for the first time in my almost 19 years working in Athens-Clarke County in unified government, because, of course, I was county commissioner for 12 years where I was mayor. So that's the biggest piece of the general fund budget. If you combine the police department, the sheriff's department, other public safety agencies, and the courts, that's a little bit more than half of your general fund budget.
Wow.
And then beyond that, you've got a couple of very big departments like Transportation and Public Works that paves the roads and repairs the bridges and does that kind of thing, builds new sidewalks. It's a very large department. You've got Leisure Services, who of course runs all of the parks and the athletic fields and those facilities and runs the summer camps. That's a pretty big department with more than 80 employees in it. And of course, tons of other things. We run a pretty tight ship in Athens-Clarke County. Just to give you kind of real numbers.
Yeah.
My office is an office of two. There's myself and Christine Howard, who's my executive assistant. If you go to some peer governments that are about our same size, sometimes you'll find in the same governmental arrangement, the mayor's office has 6 people in there. Now, could I use 1 or 2 more employees to do some outreach and some research and other things? Heck yeah. But we do keep it pretty tight in Athens-Clarke County. And that's true largely across the government. In this coming year, we're certainly going to prioritize housing a whole lot. One of the activities that every local government in the state has to go through is what they call a comprehensive plan, where you have to say, as a city or county to the state of Georgia, hey, this is what our goals are, particularly around our built environment, but also a little bit with programming over the next decade. And so we're deep into that process now. Athens is growing a bunch, which is a good problem to have.
Right.
I'm buddies with the mayor of Albany, great guy, Bo Dura. Went to law school here at UGA, but Albany's trouble is they're shrinking. They're losing population, and when you lose population, that means you also lose businesses and you lose revenue, and people begin to fear for the future. We don't have that problem here. We're growing by leaps and bounds. So if you go back to the 2000 census, we had 102,000 people in Athens-Clarke County. Here in 2025, we've got about 135,000 people. So we've grown by more than 30,000 people this century, which means that those are people who are moving here to be students. They're people coming for jobs at the hospital or jobs at all the research facilities or the vaccine production facilities that are popping up here. They're coming for jobs at Caterpillar. They're coming for jobs in the creative community because we're this big creative hub. We've got a film studio that just opened a couple of years ago.
Right.
James Franco is filming out there as we speak.
Yep.
So there's all kinds of great stuff happening in Athens-Clarke County, but with a lot of growth, certainly comes with some pressure.
Right.
People need places to live.
Yeah.
And we know that in 2007 and 8, the economy hit the skids. And it stayed challenged for a few years. And that was a period of time when, even though people continued to have babies and move to town to go to school, and particularly when the economy's rough, more people go off to school and go to graduate school because they're like, hard to find a job right now. Might as well go back and get my MBA or get my degree in public administration or get my degree in journalism or PR. So all that's going on at the same time that, again, 15 years ago, for several years, it was hard to get a loan to build a place or to construct a new condo complex or apartment complex. And so that means that we're really behind. And we're not alone. Same's true in Gainesville, Florida. Same's true in Columbia, South Carolina. Same is true in Jacksonville. Every mid-sized city is behind in terms of housing construction. That just puts stress on everybody because you've got more people with effectively the same number of places to live. And that means that every place that there is to live is in demand, and thus the prices go up. That's basic economics 101, right? Supply and demand. Well, I taught for 5 years here in the Clarke County School District. So what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that we're creating a regulatory environment and a zoning environment where private developers can build what they need to build so there are places for people to live. Fortunately, there's been a lot of research on the way that this impacts a local economy. And every economist around the globe says, listen, if you increase the supply, that's going to stabilize prices.
Gotcha.
Are you going to make prices go down? Is that $1,500 apartment suddenly going to become a $1,000 apartment? No. But you're going to stabilize prices so that $1,500 apartment doesn't become a $2,000 apartment.
Right.
So we're really focused on that, and also conscious of the reality that for over 200 years, we've had a chunk of the population living in poverty, and so we have to do some very specific things to support their residential needs. So you grew up here, Ryan. You remember Bethel Homes, right?
Yeah.
We had friends who lived there.
Yes, sir.
And unfortunately, for the last couple of decades, that has not been a great place to live.
Right.
It's been a place where the sewer lines are crumbling, where the roofs were not stable, where toilets would blow up, insulation was not solid. So we are totally rebuilding the area that had been Bethel Homes so that there are going to be more units for people to live in, some of them for people who are permanently or long-term low income, some of people who are middle income, firefighters, teachers, nurses, and then some of them for folks market rate who might be a professor at the university.
Right.
So ultimately, we're going to go from something like 600 bedrooms in Bethel Homes and then the adjacent public housing neighborhood. And it's kind of right there up on College.
Right on the hill.
Those lower ones,
right by the bridge.
We're going to go from about 600 bedrooms to more like 1,800 bedrooms. So we've got more places for people to live right there in the center of town where you can kind of walk to stuff. You can walk to get a good cup of coffee. You can walk to get a slice of pizza. You can walk to work. You're only a mile from the hospital.
Right.
You're not too far from Barrow Elementary where kids who live there go to school. So that's going to be an enormously great asset to our community. The first phase of that is just about to open. We're about to put folks in those apartments. We're also working with folks like the Athens Land Trust, Habitat for Humanity, and the East Athens Development Corporation to build some new houses that are permanently affordable too. Everybody's like, hey, you funded some of these 2 years ago. Why don't I see a house yet? Well, the reality is stuff is just difficult to build here in 2025. Prices are expensive. It's hard to get labor. And financing continues to be challenging. Now, it's easier than it was in 2010, but it's still challenging. Project I point to all the time is redevelopment of that Varsity site on the corner of Millage Avenue and West Broad. They had all their approvals 6 years ago. County Commission and Mayor at the time, 6 years ago, had said, hey, we approve this. This is ready to roll. Go forth and do well. Well, it just took the developer a while to assemble the funds to do the construction, to get the crew ready, and to begin work. So that's just the construction environment we're in.
Things take time.
Takes time. It takes time.
So what's at the moment, I guess, because I feel like you've gone through most of the big rocks, but what are like, for example, the TAD project with the mall?
Yeah.
Just give us some depth into that.
So 2 years ago, the County Commission and I approved 2 things for the mall redevelopment. One was just the physical plan. What's it going to look like? What's going to be there? And basically, there's going to be about 1,000 bedrooms of apartments, a couple hundred townhomes, grocery store area. The Belk is going to stay because Belk has this very, very, very long lease that they were not interested in being bought out of.
Okay.
So that's going to stay there. There's going to be some new outdoor dining, some new retail, some new restaurants. About 2/3 of the mall will come down.
Okay.
And these other things I've described will come up in their place. There's going to be a senior apartment complex. So that was the first thing. Physically, what's going to be there? In addition to all those things, kind of a big central green where you've got a band shell on one end, so you can kind of host outdoor events.
Right.
About 1.5 miles of biking and walking trails. Again, senior dwellings, folks are going to be able to go out their front door and get a good walk in. The other thing that we approved was what's called a community benefits agreement that says, all right, developer, because you're going to use some tax dollars that emerge out of this new construction, what do you have to do for the community? And what they had to do is create several thousand square feet of youth development space that's going to be for folks like the Boys and Girls Club and extra special people. They had to have 10% of those rental units that were 60% of area median income. So in real dollar terms, they had to rent out some of these for folks who are making like $40,000 or $45,000 a year.
Right.
And then they had to have some of the commercial space that's available at a below market rate for women and minority-owned businesses.
Okay.
And they had to set aside an area for a new bus station because as we evolve our public transit system, we're going to have these outlying stations. There'll be one kind of by the east side Walmart and one by the mall where you can transfer.
Got it.
And so this is going to create the infrastructure so that eventually you can get a bus, say, all the way out to the Caterpillar plant in Bogle.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
Want to be clear about expectations.
Right.
But this is going to allow that. This is going to make that possible. And so that way, if you just need to come into the Caterpillar plant to the mall, maybe you're living there in the future version of the mall property and you're working at Caterpillar, you just take a bus back and forth.
Right.
So that all was approved, this community benefits plan and the zoning plan 2 years ago. And now, like every developer, the developer's trying to figure out how their financing is going to work. So like I just described, this stuff just doesn't happen overnight. Man, I would wish you could snap your fingers and make it happen. Funny story. I was just out at a design workshop with 6 other mayors in Long Beach, California. And a mayor from Southern California, from Laguna Hills, was part of this design workshop. And every mayor had to bring kind of their local design opportunity, what they would like to see in the future of their community. This mayor brought a mall site in Laguna Hills. It's a hugely valuable site because it's right on Interstate 5 in Southern California, between Los Angeles and Anaheim, big money area, property's very valuable. But their site sat dormant for 15 years. Right. So I texted one of the mall owners and I was like, here's what I'm seeing out here. Are you going to sit dormant for 15 years? And he's like, hell no.
Right.
It just takes time, though.
How much time?
Hopefully not very long. Hopefully not.
Okay. I just see a lot of the things that are changing around town. I just noticed that was like one of the big things people are talking about.
Of course.
The next thing I want to really hit on the list is like the Classic Center, the Athens-Ford Arena.
Yeah.
you guys put that project together, approved it, what, 2018 in Splost?
So, yep, approved in 2018-19 in Splost. The arena's built, completely done, hosting everything from Harlem Globetrotters to Megan Maroney, who went to school here in the music business program and is now blowing it up nationwide.
Right.
To the Rock Lobsters hockey team. To the crosstown rivalry basketball game that I saw with my son Noah this fall between Cedar and Central. So that was very sweet, fabulously successful. I mean, everybody has given the experience accolades. And of course, one of the benefits of having the arena there, just like the Classic Center itself, is you can roll right from downtown to the arena and back. So if you want to get a meal beforehand and then go to a hockey game and then go have a beer, you don't have to get in your car to do that.
Right.
Now, everything comes with a cost. And so in addition to about $34 million of Splost money that went into the arena, and then some other funding streams, like you mentioned that Akins Ford is the sponsor.
Right.
And so they provided about $6 million. We borrowed about $107 million, and that's got to be paid back with revenue from the arena.
Gotcha.
Some of that revenue is from tickets and merchandise and food and bev, but some of it is going to be from what happens around the arena, because there's about 8 acres of public land. And so in much the same way that you can go over to Truist Park in Cobb County, and there are restaurants and hotels and apartment complexes right outside and the music venue.
Right.
There will be some of that similar stuff that surrounds the arena.
Right.
And so we're in the planning process of that right now. And so, in fact, I've got a meeting next Friday where some county commissioners and some Downtown Development Authority members and some Classic Center board members have agreed to work with me on a committee that's going to roll all that out.
So I want to go back a little bit in history, because, as you said, Megan Maroney went to school here.
Yeah.
She was in some ways nurtured and helped, to grow to where she is now from this community. And often it feels like, if we look back, you have the Quavos, Fujiano Migos, other artists that are from Athens, but they don't have that kind of story. They had to leave to find their success. They had to leave to get those investments and to get those platforms, and to not be able to do that in your home. I know some of them feel, like, hey, that could have been me, So it's like, how do you feel like some of these new venues are like helping promote the whole culture of Athens? Because, I know Paul told me he's drawing a 250-mile radius around this arena, and that's who he wants to come. But it's like, how do you, how are we investing in the Athens culture? Not just the infrastructure, but the culture of Athens and how it's relevant in the, bigger market. How do you see that applying or pushing Athens in that area?
And for any community that wants to invest in some of its core assets, it takes doing a bunch of different things at the same time. So certainly having performance spaces is one of those things. And, we benefit from a compact downtown where really within less than a half mile walk, you can go from a 50-person stage to a 500-person stage to an 1,100 seat to a 2,200 seat to now an 8,500 seat venue. So that's great. So, from just a physical space, we've got it.
Right.
And then it takes doing some of the hand-holding that any entrepreneur needs, right? So heck, it doesn't matter whether you're in the home building space, whether you're going to develop like the newest microcomputer, or whether you're in the creative arts.
Right.
You need somebody to be that guide, that shepherd who's going to kind of help move you into your career. Because I think anybody, and let's dive into music. Anybody gets involved in music because they love the art of music. They love the expression. It is still the case that, even though I'm busy as heck and I don't get to listen to as much new music as I like, the first thing I do when I get in the car is, if I'm not listening to a podcast, I'm putting on some of my favorite jams. That's how I keep myself alive.
Right.
And that's what musicians are driven by, is their passion for their work. Now, you can be really passionate about your work, and you might be a great songwriter, you may be a great beat programmer, you may be a great vocalist, you may be a great drummer or bass player. And then all of a sudden you find out, oh my heavens, I also have to be a good PR person, and I have to know about marketing, and I have to know about finance, and I have to know about touring, and I have to know about, how much of my budget should be spent on studio time.
Right.
And I have to find people to help me with all this. So part of what we are building, because it's a work in progress, is kind of that support apparatus.
Okay.
And what is good is that you can find people in Athens who can help you with all those subspecialties. You know,
Right.
they're world-renowned music recording studios here.
Tell a few just so they.
Sure. I mean, we are here, and for decades, John Keane has recorded people from all over the globe. David Barbie continues at Chase Park Transduction with his partners there to record artists from all around.
Yep.
Of course, in these days, you got people who are recording in their bedrooms, and their records are blowing up all over the place. I mean,
Right.
it's fascinating to me, that aspect of recording live.
Right. The thing that I want to see kind of come back with these new investments are these music moments. Back in, I forgot the exact day, but when REM was jamming, packing out downtown Athens, I think Athens is in a space now to bring artists like that here, bigger artists, and actually make more of those moments. I feel like we lack a lot of those moments. I mean, unless it's like Kylie Jenner or Kendall Jenner coming to,
Right.
or
Bartender, whatever.
yeah, or Quavo coming for the Urban Outfitters concert. It seems like there's corporate interest in this entertainment market here, and so it seems like Athens is like, you guys are pushing it forward in that direction where there can be more of those opportunities.
Sure. And of course, we recognize that even as a county of 135,000 and as a metro of a little over 400,000, that's going to be a different environment than Metro Atlanta with 6 million people,
Right.
stemming from Henry County up to Cherokee County. I mean, that's just a different phenomenon.
Right.
But I think if you look at comparable markets, if you think of us compared to Gainesville, Florida, or Columbia, South Carolina, look at music bookings here and at those places, I think we're doing pretty darn well. Now, to push that forward, one of the things we did a couple of years ago is we put a small business and creative entrepreneur position within our economic development department. So there was somebody there in our economic development office who was just dealing with folks on a modest scale, who wasn't dealing with the 1,200 employee manufacturers of the world or the big biotech titans of the world.
Right.
Was just helping people with that, step by step, day by day kind of process. Of course, also benefit from having the small business office that's over at the University of Georgia. They're headquartered here, and they've got a statewide mission, but given that they're housed in Athens, that helps us out a bunch. And then what I will say is sort of the feeder program is good and getting better.
Okay.
You may know that there's a recording studio over at the Maine Boys and Girls Club Center on 4th Street.
Yep.
And so we've got a mechanism that's going to help today's 12-year-olds figure out how to record.
Right.
And then you do well there. Heck, you go to summer camp over at Nucci Space, and you go to Camp Amped, and you meet some kids who are equally passionate, who you might have never met. And all of a sudden, they have you just in the space of a couple of weeks form a band together.
Right.
And so you've got to learn to play with some players who you've never interacted with, and write some songs and perform by the end of that. And then again, we've got this sequence of venues. So what I love is this continuum of opportunity. And that's what, as somebody who worked with middle school and high school students here for 20 years, really wants to see in every industry.
Right.
So, for example, in biotech, where we've got 2 Johnson & Johnson subsidiaries, we've got Boehringer Ingelheim, a world-renowned German vaccine manufacturer. We've got Meisner, whose production facility that will make the devices that then produce vaccine and employ 1,700 people. So we got all these folks, and I've heard for my whole life, living here in Athens for 30 years, hey, this is great, good, big money, whatever. What about kids who grew up here in Athens?
Right.
What about that kid who grew up in Nellie B? What about that kid who grows up on Tallahassee Road in Rustwood? What about that kid? Well, now what we've done is we've built into the school district at the Career Academy a means where, as a 10th or 11th or 12th grader, you can go through a biotech pathway there, and you can get jobs in any of those facilities.
Be employed.
And then if you want to go to Athens Tech and get an associate's degree and move up, you can do that, and go to UGA and get a bachelor's degree, or eventually your PhD. You can do that.
Right.
But what we are really wanting to do is kind of reach down to that young child level to kind of pull them through all the way. whether you're interested in recording music or working in a laboratory, or opening a construction planning business.
Right.
So I'm really excited about that work.
So I want to talk about low income families, because I think that's probably a part of this that, those people are really the ones that are at risk of being relocated, priced out of their homes and things like that. And so I really want to know, how is the city, pushing affordable single family housing and, getting people the best support that they can get,
Sure. So if you're thinking about affordable housing for lower income families, the easiest thing to tackle is the housing that's already here. All right. So we've done a couple of things over the last couple of years. One is we've reintroduced this low income housing tax credit for people who may be earning under 200% of the poverty rate, which is about $40,000 a year. They can basically get their taxes frozen. And so that way they won't see their tax rate grow up. It's a specialty homestead exemption. If you go to our website, accgov.com, and just go over to the tax commissioner's page, there's a piece on that page that tells you how to file the paperwork for that. In some ways, you might think of it as like akin to, what you did as a kid if you were on like free and reduced lunch. You submit your paperwork, here's my income statement, and now your taxes freeze. So that way, at least the tax piece of it is not ever going to be a greater burden.
Yeah.
And then another thing that we're doing through our sustainability office is a home improvement program for people who are in lower income environments. And so we can do things like add insulation or add kind of new doors and windows or solar panels that are going to lower your energy costs.
Got it.
So these are all sort of stabilizing forces. And of course, the other thing we're doing is that we're working with nonprofits to build some more affordable units. Now, in real dollar terms, to build an affordable unit means that we end up putting in, and this can be through labor, like in the Habitat for Humanity model, where you have people come to volunteer with hammers and saws, or through cash or some combination. You generally have to subsidize construction of a home to the tune of about $150,000. So an inexpensive home to build these days here in 2025 costs about $300,000 to build a relatively inexpensive 1,000 or 1,200 square foot home. And so if we can subsidize that by about half of that cost down to about $150,000 or maybe $200,000, then you can get something that's affordable that somebody can get a loan pay back on.
Right. How do people get into that? Is that
so? We've got all those nonprofit partners, and you apply through them. So apply through the East Athens Development Corporation for the building 3 homes. Habitat continues to build a couple homes every year. Land Trust continues to build a couple homes every year.
How do they qualify in the sense of just priority?
I think, and you'd want to talk to some folks.
Yeah.
But I can tell you very basically a couple things. One is that you've got to get qualified. So you have to be income qualified.
Right.
Because if you're above too much of the poverty rate, then you can't qualify at all. So you have to be income qualified, and then you've got to be credit qualified, which could be a process. And so part of what we do every year is we work with some of these same organizations to help people work on credit.
Right. Okay.
And then you get in line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Heard about those lines.
Yes.
In the sense of what's out here now, if you're renting a house, like I know one of my friends, his mom, I think the person that owned their house is now about to sell it. And so it's like now they have to, find a new place. What would you recommend for somebody that's?
So, for somebody in that boat, certainly, you look at what's at the private market. Again, as things are built, there's going to be more stability. We are building a bunch of things that are set up to be permanently affordable. So, for example, there are a bunch of new apartments that are right behind the big Kroger, what everybody calls the Space Kroger by Athens-Clarke.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So
you're right.
A couple hundred affordable units there. There are going to be some more units on Lexington Highway, kind of backing up close to the airport, sort of close to where like the tag office is over there. And then there are going to be some that are senior directed that are out by the big target that's on Atlanta Highway.
Okay.
And so we've got some coming out of the ground literally right now,
Mhm.
and then some that are in the pipeline that have all their approvals and just have to start building.
Right.
Unfortunately, one of the things that Georgia does not have is they don't have much to deal with the investor community, because what often happens is these big international or national builders will buy lots of units. And so that's what happened over in Lexington Heights, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you had a national company who came in, they bought all the units, and then they stopped taking housing vouchers. So if you're a veteran and you have a housing voucher because you're a veteran, or you have a housing voucher because you're disabled, they no longer take those vouchers.
Wow.
Some states have, and I would recommend this in Georgia. And so if anybody who's in the General Assembly is listening to this, I would encourage you, and if anybody is talking to anybody in the General Assembly, I would encourage you to demand that we have a source of income law across the state of Georgia. And that says that if I come with a voucher from the federal government, and that voucher is as good as cash, all you got to do as a property owner is turn that into the federal government. They give you your $800,000, that has to be accepted. Georgia doesn't have that law.
Who do you feel like that's, I mean, do you think that's just, it hasn't gotten that far yet, or is that somebody benefits off that law not being there?
Well, certainly it is the case that there's one more step for that property owner. You got to turn in that voucher, and then you got to wait until your cash hits your bank account.
Mm-hmm.
Not much of a step, but it is one more step.
Yeah.
But a lot of states kind of have this arrangement where you have to accept that voucher.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the other thing it does is it discriminates against people who might be disabled or might be veterans or might be low income. And so there's, you know, sadly, some interest in discriminating against those folks, or as they may call them, those people.
Yeah.
And I'd like us not to think of them as those people, but think of them as just other neighbors who are making it through life and trying to raise their kids and trying to get to work and trying to enjoy their weekends just like you and I.
Right. And so how do you feel UGA in the sense, like, how do they help, if any, you know, in maintaining affordable housing, or have they ever came to the government for a partnership? How is that?
So, sometimes the university has needed to finance new housing construction, and sometimes they've used the Athens Housing Authority that we in the local government don't directly manage, but I do appoint board members to, kind of for a financial conduit for their new housing. And so that's kind of the closest we've come. Now, certainly as the university continues to grow, I encourage them to continue to look at more on-campus housing opportunities. They just built Diallo Hall over there on Baxter Street. Was the first new dormitory to come out of the ground in a very long time. There's one that's under construction right now, you're probably aware of, that's on Lumpkin Street, relatively close to downtown. Kind of near the Collections Library, like where the music archive and all that is. So that's helpful. That's very helpful. Because again, from a supply perspective, it helps the market stay stable. If the university doesn't build anything, then the private market is the only thing to step in. And now I don't mind the private market being a piece of the puzzle. You know, you think about places like Georgia Heights or the Standard or the Mark. Those were all built where nobody was living, right? You know, underneath the Standard, you had a hardware store. Underneath the Mark, you had a lumber yard. Underneath Georgia Heights, you just had a bank parking. But at some point, we're going to run out of those places. So the more that we can have some on-campus housing to be a complement with the private sector stuff, the better. You know, UGA has just announced a plan a couple of weeks ago where they've said, hey, we're gonna have our increases be about 600 students a year for the next 5 years. So that means, you know, 600 more bedrooms are going to be needed every year the next 5 years. So as they look at both their core campus and the health science campus on Prince Avenue, that's going to be the medical college at the University of Georgia, and even the vet school campus over on the east side on College Station Road, you know, those would all be opportunities where some new housing would complement the new students.
There's a lot of space over there off College Station, definitely. When it comes to, because I believe this year you got some new commissioners on the board.
So one, Commissioner Johnson just started in January, and then 2 Januaries prior, Commissioner Taylor, Commissioner Fisher, and Commissioner Culpepper.
Right. So now that you've kind of got a new commission here, how has that been? How's it been working with your new commissioners and I guess, partnering and hey, like I need help here, or how do you kind of guide the boat?
Yeah, it certainly takes some time for any new commissioner to get in the groove. It's a big job. It's complex. You have all these financial considerations and legal considerations and zoning matters. And even if you've been paying attention, it takes a couple of years to really understand what the mission space is and what tools you have at your disposal. So it just takes some time. And so given that we've got some who are just 2 years in and one who just started, it's taken a little while to coalesce. We did have a retreat just a couple of months ago where we updated our strategic plan, and we're about to formalize that. Basically, we kind of did all the brainstorming work, and then we're going to have it as a document that's approved. And that strategic plan really is the map, because it says, all right, each of us may individually have some things that we care about, but here's what we collectively care about. Here's what we collectively endorse. And that helps our departments, and it helps our county manager, which we're going to get a new one of this summer. And then it helps us as policymakers to say, hey, there may be all this stuff out here that we disagree on, but here's the pot of stuff that we do agree on.
Right. And I know recently during the last budget review meeting, you guys were kind of going through it. What did you, from the staff recommendation point, what did their budget, like what stuck out to you in there that you're like, oh, the commission didn't see this, but staff thinks this should be funded or operated. What's your viewpoint on that?
So certainly this year, given that we've got some expenses that are just naturally increasing, the cost of fuel is naturally increasing. The cost of vehicles is naturally increasing. The cost of asphalt's naturally increasing. The cost of materials is naturally increasing. The cost of healthcare, salary is naturally increasing because we want to retain people. And when we've got openings, we want new people to come. So we don't really have a lot to play with in this coming budget. It will probably be a relatively stable budget from last year to this coming year.
Right.
We had set out on this path about 3 years ago to increase our medical capacity within the Fire and Emergency Services Department.
Right.
So having made that commitment a few years ago, we're going to honor that commitment. And so we're going to add 3 staff members in the fire department.
Okay.
I anticipate this year that we probably will have a couple of new things, but only a couple.
Mm-hmm.
There was state legislation a year ago that will mean that our revenue doesn't grow as fast because anybody who's a resident homeowner is going to have their property tax increase capped at no more than the rate of inflation. So it's not true about commercial properties. It's not true about rental properties, but it is true about homeowner occupied properties, which is about 40% of our property inventory. So this is just one of those years where you've got to dig in and do the things you do just particularly well.
Right.
Kind of more about the quality of the work than the quantity of new staff or new program.
Right, because that's what I was going to ask next is like staffing, because I'm a media journalist and I submitted a records request and it almost went over the 72-hour mark, and I was like, what's going on? And come to find out, they feel like they're a little understaffed in the clerk, department over there. So in regards to the police department and police funding, just break that down for me. Where do you start, and where's the recommendation? What are they recommending, and then versus how you as the mayor kind of tailoring that budget for them?
So what I expect is that staff's recommendations will be right in line with my ultimate recommendation to the commission and commission approval for that matter, because we've really kind of set this up to be a very clean and understood process. So what we put in place about 5 years ago is a public safety plan that's all for salaries. That's a lot like, say, a teacher compensation plan.
Okay.
Where, I was a classroom teacher for a long time. When you go from your 3rd year as a classroom teacher to your 4th year, you get an automatic raise, and you know what that raise is going to be. It's very open, it's clear.
Right.
And then in good economic years, the whole thing rises. So everybody's 2nd year becomes more valuable. Everybody's 3rd year becomes more valuable. So what I expect this year is we're going to continue with that public safety pay plan, and then we're going to make the whole plan 3% more valuable.
Mm.
And so very recurrent, very understood. Fortunately, what we have done through that plan is we raised the opening salary for a police officer from in the 30s not very long ago to about $56,000 a year right now with a $10,000 signing bonus.
Mm.
And, if you drive up I-75 near Macon, you're going to see billboards
Yeah.
for our police
Yep.
department because
Yep.
we're wanting to get the best and the brightest from around the state.
Right.
And we've been able to do that. We have about 225 sworn officers who are police officer standards training certified. All those positions are full. There are going to be some retirements. That just happens.
Right.
So we've still got openings in the sense that we know some folks are going to retire this year.
Okay.
But we've got all those positions full right now as we speak,
Right.
which is really exciting. On side, I'll tell you that Chief Salters would want me to say, and I'm glad to proclaim, the recent classes of police officer hires are very diverse. Black police officers, Latino police officers, female police officers, and any community benefits when your police force looks like the community because that ensures a level of trust. And particularly what we've seen over the last decade or more, you want to make sure there's trust in the police department.
Right.
Is everybody going to be happy about every officer? Is everybody going to agree with every arrest? Of course not. That's just not the way it works in reality.
Mm-hmm.
But is there going to be at least an opportunity for people to go, oh, like I grew up with that dude.
Yeah.
Or like, oh man, that guy used to date my sister-in-law.
Right.
Whatever.
Right. My cousin is actually a police officer. So yeah, it's everybody in our community. How do you feel that's going to equip, Athens with better qualitative policing?
Mm-hmm. So on the qualitative front, one of the things we know is that a lot of people who become involved in criminality have some behavioral health challenges, have some mental crises.
Mm-hmm.
In the state of Georgia, a police officer has to have about 8 hours a year of behavioral health training. But we require more than 5 times that much because what we want is we want people to be really well-versed in dealing with people who are having some challenging times. I mean, heck, man, if you're getting arrested, it ain't a good day.
Yeah.
And it may be a good day. It may not be a good day because your wife just left you. It may not be a good day because you lost your job and you started drinking or drugging.
Yeah.
It may be a bad day because you've had some ongoing health challenges and those are impacting your psyche. Everybody who talks about the human body, talks about this mind-body connection. Man, if you got a sore foot and it won't stop, man, your brain is not going to be good. Heck, man, if you've got an abscessed tooth and you haven't been able to get that pulled, you're not going to be a happy camper. And so our police force is and needs to continue to be well-versed in interacting with people who are having those kind of challenges.
Right. I'm glad to hear that. As far as the time that you spent, because, it's just so many things have changed since you came. Dr. Means, the school district. What do you see the next, 5 to 6 years of Athens just developing? Where do you see it heading?
So some of these things that we've discussed today, we need to continue to lean into because these are not one and done propositions, right? So housing affordability and availability is not one and done. We need to continue to lean into that. And kind of as a sideline to that, we need to continue to lean into getting people out of homelessness.
Right.
We need to continue to lean into mental health support for everything from elementary school kids up through retirees.
Right.
We need to continue to lean into youth support generally because every one of those kids who establishes good quality relationships with people who are well-intentioned, who are helping them get their lives in a well-directed place, we need to continue to do that. We haven't pushed poverty down as much as I'd like, but we've moved from about 30% to about 26% over the last 10 years.
Okay.
We need to continue to do this youth work because this needs to be a generational story.
Compound.
I hope that my successor 5 years from now and that person's successor 5 years from then is going to be able to say, hey, we continue to work on these things that were not easy things and that required playing the long game and that required continued investment of resources and energy. And I hope that somebody sitting in this seat 15 years from now is going to be able to say, hey, we pushed poverty down to 15%. And maybe 15 years after that, if God willing, I'm still alive, somebody's like, yeah, we pushed it down under 10%.
If you had, because I know that's, one of your initiatives, transportation is a huge thing in Athens, but I think statewide transportation is something that people are wanting us to get into. And so with the airport, what's going on with that development and getting a bigger airline to want to come and do business in Athens, where you guys are?
So the airline industry does a big conference every year, and our airport director and assistant director attend that conference, and they've gotten very positive indications about what people believe about Athens as a market. And that's not just based on people's vibes, it's based on data. Because if you look at what you would call a catchment area, like let's say you go to Google Maps, put a pin on the map and draw a 45-mile radius around Athens, let's say up to Hartwell and out to Lawrenceville, down to Greensboro, up to Commerce.
Right.
Effectively, if you draw that circle around Athens, you're going to find that a lot of those folks are flying out of Hartsfield every day, a lot of them. And if you told all those folks, hey, what if instead of flying to New York or Washington, D.C. or Chicago or London out of Hartsfield, what if you could fly out of Athens and make a link at an international airport and get there without having to drive to Atlanta, without having to pay crazy money to park, without having to stand in line for an hour for security, to go through TSA. A lot of people within that 45-mile radius would say, hell yeah. And so we've done that formal analysis. Now, the airline industry, obviously, kind of through COVID, got into a rocky place.
Right.
You didn't have enough pilots. You didn't have enough folks to be flight attendants.
Then you had to have social
or social distancing. Even though that's gone away,
right?
The industry still hasn't quite gotten its footing under it. So I think as soon as the industry begins to kind of grow in their employment, we're going to be one of those first medium-sized markets that gets a regular scheduled airline. But we're staying at the table because we want to make sure we're there. We don't just want to wonder. We're engaging with industry every year, multiple times a year. So I think that's likely.
What will that bring? What is that benefit of having bigger airlines come to Athens?
So, it does mean you can get to places more directly. It means you save time. Heck, it means you save money because if you take Groom to the airport, that's $50 there and $50 back.
Right.
So you save that. And it allows bigger things to happen here. So if we want to host a national conference, just in reality, I've got friends who are mayors of peer cities that are similar sized. Scranton, Pennsylvania. Went to a conference in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Why could Scranton host a national conference of mayors? Because they got an airport.
Right.
And so if I wanted to host 50 or 80 mayors here in Athens and have all those folks buying food and drink and spending nights in hotel rooms, it'd be difficult right now because they'd have to fly in through Atlanta. But if we have an airport here and they can fly directly in, it's going to allow that kind of thing to happen.
Right.
Same thing, we've got 2 Johnson & Johnson affiliates here. Say one of those wants to host a conference of Johnson & Johnson executives. They want to do it in Athens. They want to show off. In fact, the only place in the United States where they make the mesh that goes into hernia operations. So like if your uncle or grandpa's ever had a hernia operation, they got a piece of Athens in.
Right.
But if we want to do that, that's challenging right now because you have to either fly private or fly into Atlanta.
Right.
If we've got an airline, it would be easy to do that.
What does that partnership kind of look like? I imagine you guys probably have the head of the airport kind of making those moves, but just...
So we do have a fund set aside for marketing because part of what any startup airline route needs is marketing dollars to kind of let everybody know via digital media and every other avenue, hey, we're here and we're ready for you to book. So we've got some money that we've already set aside for that. We over time have increased the length of the runways, so we can accommodate basically like a 737 now.
Oh, wow.
So, not one of the biggest jets, a good sized jet. And so the anticipation is we probably have like 50, 100 seaters coming in and out of Athens.
Do you think right now, hold on one second. If you look at how inflation is infecting a lot of like the retail, you know, market here, the entertainment market here, how do you see that, I guess, affecting like how you guys are budgeting things?
When I mentioned, hey, we're going to have some additional revenue this year, but a lot of that revenue is going to be eaten up just by existing costs. It's hitting us just like it's hitting you. I could tell you in my house, we are eating out less.
Yeah, same.
We're
Cooking
eating
more.
out a lot less and cooking more. That's right. When my 12-year-old says, "Daddy, could we have some pizza?" I'm like, "You can warm up the pizza that's in the fridge, man."
Yep, yep.
That is the way it is. And in local government, we're having to do the same thing because everything from tires to fuel to vehicles to
Right.
paper and pens to technology is just more expensive.
Atlanta is so big on their culture with like 404 day. I feel like I feel like we need something like that, like a 706 day, or like a G day, some kind of, and I know we have Athfest. Athfest captures the best of like the classic side of Athens, but I want to see how we can get, like a mix between all these different sides of Athens into one kind of festival, And so I'm curious of your perspective on just how something like that can come, to be, and what the government could do or, be involved in.
So we've got a couple of things that we do. One is that there's a community event program that the Downtown Development Authority hosts, and that does support Athfest, supports Wild Rumpus, supports the Hot Corner Festival, all those kind of things.
Right.
And it's funny because just even as a resident who just likes culture and arts and people gathering, what I have noticed is that we've sort of built the calendar out. I mean, it's crazy because Wild Rumpus, I think, is in its like 17th year or something like that. It's hard to believe that it's been that long.
Right.
That's become like a cornerstone. And so, we certainly have we had some openings in the calendar, so to speak.
Right.
So it'd be great if there was sort of a springtime festival, maybe before the weather got too bad.
Yeah.
This is always hotter than hell. It'd be nice to do something before it gets too crazy. That would be like that. And it's funny because somebody else was just pinging me and wanting me to contemplate some kind of new festival too. I didn't have a chance to look at his entire email.
Yeah, Kelly, we want to see, we want Athens to, really have some of that culture. Like it has culture. I just feel like a lot of us, Life was here the other day. It's like so many of our, young Black youth, they want to leave Athens.
Just needs a platform.
Yes.
A foundation.
Yes. And to look at how, Atlanta took their mottos and took their culture and made it something worth celebrating. It's just like, they are special, but we're special too.
We are.
And so
I'd rather live here than there.
Same.
No shade.
None at all.
No, let me tell you, I lived in Marietta in 1994, beginning of 95.
Mm-hmm.
And I never would have thought during that era that Atlanta would be hitting as hard as it is today.
Right.
There were some good things, but during that era, it felt like Atlanta had these pockets of cool stuff.
Yeah.
And now it feels like it's got this sort of crown of cool stuff.
Right.
Which is great. But, the walkability of Athens, just the ability to get around relatively easily.
Right. How do you feel like you guys look at some of the stuff they're doing up there? What does Athens get influence from?
Well, so, certainly, given their size as sort of a corporate host, as a longtime convention center, and as a place that's serious about economic development, affordable housing, and mobility, we certainly have learned some things from them. The tax allocation district model that we talked about earlier with the mall, that's something that Atlanta was doing 20 years ago. And so I'm glad that we're beginning to learn. And that's what you do as a community leaders. You learn from your peers in other places. Certainly one thing that I hope we do as a region is I hope we think about mobility as a region. You have a lot of people who live here in Athens and they work out in Gwinnett or DeKalb County. Similarly, you've got, over 25,000 students whose families are in Metro Atlanta, and they go to school out here
Mm-hmm.
as students at the University of Georgia or University of North Georgia. One of the things that I've been working on for a few years is some kind of regular public bus link between here and MARTA, so that you could jump on a bus at the multimodal center downtown,
Yeah.
and that you could step off a bus at a MARTA station and then get wherever you needed to around Atlanta.
Right.
And so that way, if you want to go to a Hawks game or if you want to go to a concert at State Farm Arena, you could do that easily. Or if you want to go to a convention for a couple of nights and you don't want to have to deal with Groom or parking or
Right, yeah.
I-85, which is like the bane of my existence, you don't have to deal with that.
Right.
Because, of course, if you're in Washington, D.C. or Baltimore or Philadelphia, that's the way it is up there.
Yeah.
You can just jump on the bus or jump on the train
Yeah.
and get to where you need to get to, kind of within the Northeast corridor.
Right.
And I hope that we get there within the Southeast.
Right. I remember there was a project, and it was for a speed rail train.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever happened to
That
that?
project is still live.
Okay.
So what the Federal Department of Transportation has done is they've set up a series of future high-speed rail routes. And there are two that go through Georgia, and one of those goes through Athens. So the one through Athens would go from Atlanta to Sewanee to Athens to Greenville, South Carolina to Charlotte. It would be high-speed rail. They've mapped it out as going kind of mostly through rural areas, because they had previously looked at maybe riding along I-85 or using some of the existing rail lines, and there's too much freight traffic that doesn't want to give up its opportunity. And so they're going to go mostly through rural areas. And it either could be a diesel-based line or it could be an electric-based line. An electric-based line would go even faster.
Right.
And so an electric-based line would get you from Atlanta to Charlotte, North Carolina in under 2.5 hours.
Wow.
So they've done some of the pre-engineering. The next step is for them to do some of the sort of block by block, mile by mile engineering that figures out, okay, exactly how do you come out of Atlanta and get to Sewanee? Exactly how do you come out of Sewanee and get to Athens, and so forth. And then obviously the construction.
Right.
I spoke with the Georgia Department of Transportation Commissioner Russell McMurray, a great guy. He used to be the regional engineer for this part of Georgia. And he expects it still to happen, expects it's going to be some time before it literally is out of the ground. But it's just going to keep every one of the participant states, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, continuing to push to get that through.
Sure.
Just like the other line, which will go from Savannah to Macon to Atlanta to Chattanooga to Nashville. Yep. And so that's the kind of thing that folks in the States, particularly in the Southeast, haven't been as accustomed to. But having traveled in Europe, I can tell you, man, it's just a great part of life.
Yeah. Have a speed rail.
Yeah, because I've been to Europe a few times, and only one of those 4 times that I've been to Europe did I rent a car. Every other time, get around city to city,
Right.
within the city, without having a car at all.
So it can help with even increasing our tourism.
Yeah, increase tourism, increase economic development. So let's say that somebody comes from Frankfurt, Germany to Georgia because they want to do some technical or medical work, and they want to talk to folks at Georgia Tech, and they want to talk to folks at UGA. If you can fly into Atlanta and you can get on MARTA and spend a couple days at Georgia Tech, and then you get on that high-speed rail and be out in Athens in under an hour, that's going to help enormously.
Right. I did want to mention, because you guys are doing some rezoning, and my curiosity was just what is that? I think it was from the March 4th Mayor and Commission meeting. I think it was like item 14 and 15, the East Side projects. I'm just fill them in on kind of what that situation was like for the Mayor and Commission and where you guys are at with it now.
Sure. So I mentioned what a challenge housing is right now,
Right.
and how we just need more so that people aren't stressed. You think about it as like this citywide game of musical chairs, right?
Right.
So you got 135,000 people. If you've only got 100,000 chairs, man, 35,000 people are going to be out in the cold.
Right.
And so we don't want that. So we had 2 projects that were approved. One where there is a little bit of housing. There's an older house, and then there were, I think, 8 or 10 slips for like travel trailers
Okay.
where people had RVs hooked up. And that's going to become a new development just off North Avenue in Strickland, if you know where that intersection is. And then not too far from there, there is a place that used to be like an appliance shop, and then it was a Mexican restaurant that's on Coney Street, just before you get to the loop when you're coming out of.
Okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's right next to the Shell
right,
gas station.
That's exactly right.
Yep,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's going to be a new apartment complex as well.
Oh, wow.
And so, in both those cases, commissioners just kind of wanted to understand some of the bells and whistles with them. In the North Avenue plan, people wanted to make sure that we updated our zoning code. So if you had a travel trailer or an RV, you could park that in kind of a traditional trailer park. And so we're updating code to do that. But both of those got approval. And those are the easiest kind of things, basically, to take a place where nobody's living or very few people, and to increase it into a place where a bunch of folks are living, especially where you're close to town, you're already on the bus route. Heck, in the case of both those, you're even near like parks and things.
Right.
On North Avenue, you're right around the corner from Virginia Walker Park, where you can go watch kids play football or have a good time, or go to the splash pad. Over there on Lexington, you're right there at the Greenway and almost backing up to UGA. So, if you're going to be working in a laboratory on campus or taking classes, you're right there. I mean, those are the real good opportunities. And so we need to be looking for more of those opportunities. So some of that's going to mean redevelopment of places that maybe had been built in 1960 or 1970 that just need new life.
Okay. I really do appreciate you for coming on. I think, I've touched base on everything that I wanted, to kind of learn about the upcoming budget and just where Athens is heading. Is there anything that you want to leave with the viewers or readers? Of course, you're more than welcome to come back if there's anything that you want to let us know about, but is there anything now that you want to kind of leave and to say, hey, like, look out for this or pay attention to this?
Well, we've mentioned a bunch of things here. We talked about housing a great deal. The way that local government housing policy works, the first thing a local government has to do is pass what's called a future land use plan. And after they do that, they pass zoning updates. That future land use plan is going to come to the county commission this summer. So that'll be something to look forward to.
Okay, well, everybody, this is our mayor, Kelly Girtz, and
Alan Carson.
Yeah, yes, sir. I'm finished
With the most.
Yes,
Good to
sir.
see you, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much.